Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at NASDAQ. Joining us at the MarketSite studio in Times Square, New York City, we have Chris Englebert, founding partner and chief investment officer of Englebert Investment Advisers, to discuss how the market has evolved from 2017 to 2023. And Chris, it's very specific that we're talking about 6 years because August of 2017 is when we first met. However, in our Philex offices in Philadelphia, now here we are bringing it full circle in the Times Square studio, and a lot has happened in that 6 years.
Yeah, it really has, Jill. I mean, it flew by, but some of the news stories I kind of pulled out, and it'll be fun to do this, is that in 2017 we had our biggest hurricane season ever. I'd forgotten that. Equifax account hack, and now it seems like we're seeing account hacks all the time. The Bitcoin frenzy was in full force. I mean, I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but here's what I thought was really interesting was the Fed was struggling with whether they should raise Fed funds from 1.25 to 1.5. Now, that's 2017 when monetary policy was still pretty loose. But the other thing that people may or may not remember about 2017, all 12 months in the S&P 500 were positive. We'd never seen that before, and the S&P finished up over 21% in an extremely low volatile market. And people were like, I just got to keep buying. So, when you look back at history, you're like, wow, did that really happen? The other big news stories was major tax reform, which we saw corporate and personal income tax rates drop dramatically in 2017. And the good news here in 2023 is they've yet to be raised or increased at this point in time, which is helping the consumer. But the other story, Amazon buys Whole Foods. It was kind of a shocker.
I was on the floor with you in Philadelphia. It happened that morning around the open.
And we were like, what are they going to do with Whole Foods? So they have Whole Foods now. People are using Whole Foods, and they seem to be a good fit. But then you flash forward to 2023. Here we are, August of 2023, and some of the stories are kind of repeating themselves. But the big news is all about inflation. We're down from 9% to 3%, which is still high historically, but not as high as it was last year. Employment's strong, but like I said, what's interesting is the Fed is struggling. Are they going from 5.25 to 5.5 or 5 3/4? Contrast this to 2017 when they were struggling with, do we go up to 1.5%? But the other thing I thought was interesting is that Bitcoin is now a legitimate asset class, but the difference between 2017 and 2023 is that there's been several major exchanges that have gone out of business, with the whole Bitcoin frenzy. But let me just give you some numbers. So Bitcoin was 3,400 back in 2017. It's now 29,500, give or take. The S&P in August was 2,438. Today, 44.75. NASDAQ was 57.88. Now, this is a shocker here. It's over 15,000, and the Dow was 21,800, and it's now 35,000. So, and then if you look at interest rates, they were low back then. We had the 10-year Treasury at 2.21%. It's now at 4%. So, some of the things are different, but some of them are almost the same here 6 years later.
But Chris, it's so interesting. I remember in 2017 and a good part of 2018, before we had the last quarter temper tantrum in the market when they were, raising rates was a big part of the conversation, but it was like boring if you were a trader. Would you move 5-6 handles a day and it just ground itself up? To your point, I mean, all 12 months are up in 2017, but just think of everything that we've been through. So we had, the rate tantrum in 2018, of course, geopolitics domestically and globally, and then a pandemic. I mean, none of us were thinking about a pandemic even into the beginning of 2020 for the most part.
Right.
And then we had the volatility, for the past 18 months for the most part. And one thing we always consistently say, stay invested. Because if you would have missed out, I mean, look at the indexes doubled, tripled in the case of the NASDAQ composite.
Yeah, if you would have been scared out in 2017, even at the end of 2017, you would have missed one of the best runs in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. But what about the next 6 years?
Yeah, so we see three major trends developing. Obviously, AI is in the news right now, and everybody's like, AI, AI, AI. But I'm saying that this is a monumental shift, very similar to when Excel spreadsheets took over for calculators, or Word perfect took over for typewriters. You know, the problem is, and it's also like the early days of the internet where everybody got super excited about it, but then it was literally 3, 4, 5 years before it fully got integrated into everyday life as far as the consumer goes. We're seeing it faster in the financial services area get integrated. They always tend to be obviously the leader because that's where the money is, but I don't want to discount the hype. I think it is a game changer, but again, we got to let it roll through literally corporate America and also obviously the investment world.
It's so funny when you talk about email and leveraging the internet. Remember with AOL, we'd get all excited. You got mail. Now it's like, oh my God, my inbox just will not stop. I mean, it's ubiquitous to our everyday lives. What about financial news? It's certainly changed even in the past 6 years.
Yeah, I think the biggest trend is going to be the change in financial news. Everybody can get the financial news on their phone now. You pull up your phone, you got it there, Apple News, everybody knows. It used to be before that if you were an investment advisor, you know, people would call in, hey, what's the market doing today? Hey, is it up, down, sideways? Now people know what the market's doing. And so I think the bigger trend that's going to happen is just like there's on-demand television where, you know, most people don't watch broadcast television at the scheduled time. They want to get it when they get it. So what we think is going to happen with the news, and especially the financial news, is you're going to see the headlines, but then at the end of the day, you're going to find a source and you're going to go back, you're going to listen to a podcast, you're going to watch a video from Trade Talks to find out what's going on. And also, I think what's really good about it is that you are going to be in a little bit longer form rather than a 15 or 20-second hit. You know, the person giving you the news is going to be able to delve in for 6 or 7 minutes and say, here's what's going on behind the scenes, here's what we think is going on. Now, we think that's a huge opportunity for registered investment advisory firms like ourselves because we are producing video content all the time. We send out video content literally on a weekly basis. On our website, we have all of our video content so that people can go back to our website and be like, hey, what did Chris say about the first of the month update? We do a first of the month update literally every month. So we think how people consume news, but particularly financial news, is going to be a game changer in the next 6 years.
100%. Let's lift the curtain back on Trade Talks, for example. When we launched April 2017, the genesis behind it, my hiring manager, we want content to support. It was a marketing tool to support our clients. And think about it. What was the whole thing around Netflix? Content is king.
Right.
Everyone's leveraging it. Think about during the pandemic, and you and I have spoken about this a number of times, whether it's Zoom, whether it's video content, when people are nervous, rather than having to go through your whole book, you're able to produce this content and do, like an hour webinar and take questions live. And it completely changed the calculus of how news is produced and consumed, not just financial news, but otherwise. I mean, look at the industry podcasts have, you know, it's interesting. Everyone has a platform, but then there's more voices that can be heard versus the same panel that you see all the time. I want to talk about another thing, the transference of wealth. You and I, every single episode, regardless of the topic, planning and having the really hard conversations, and you've written some material on it. Yeah,
we've got our book, you know, Death and Dollars. We give it free to anybody that wants it because this trend is accelerating. By 2030, 100% of the baby boomers are going to be 65 and older. So in our practice, we've gone from settling 3 to 4 estates a year to literally settling an estate a month. And you know, what's very frustrating is when somebody comes in, you know, adult child, and they said, hey, you know, my parents kept really good records, and here's where everything is. And the records aren't that good. So, you know, the adult children, they've never gone through this before. They're hunting around for money. They're frustrated. They're looking for statements. They don't understand, you know, did mom and dad have IRA accounts? Did they have an individual account? Did they have annuity? What did they have? So, you know, what we really are pounding the table on is that you've got to get your financial affairs in order. Anybody who has adult parents, you know, you got to be, I hate to say aggressive with them, but if you're not, I mean, when they pass away, obviously it's not their problem, it's your problem. And we're beginning to see, you know, that there's some strategies that have to be implemented. So for example, IRAs are great. Everybody contributes to an IRA, they have a 401k, they roll it over to an IRA. IRAs are great. But what a lot of adult children don't realize is that mom and dad have IRAs and you're the beneficiary of an IRA, and let's say it's a couple of $100,000, the tax laws have changed now. The Secure Act has now stated that you have to take that money out within a 10-year period of time. So Jill, if you're still working and you're a high income earner, do you really want that income stream paid out to you and get taxed on it? What are the strategies that you're going to do? If you're older, maybe when you retire, then you start taking that money out. So a lot of adult children have to, first of all, deal with the estate, and I urge them to get our book. Because we've written this book not from a legal standpoint, but from the standpoint of like what happens. I mean, one of the other misconceptions we get all the time is people are like, oh, my dad died or my mom died, I'm going to get hammered with taxes. No, you don't understand. Once that person has obviously passed away, you then have an estate account. The estate is responsible for the taxes, and then the money that you get is obviously in most cases tax-free. So again, this is going to be the hottest topic in the next 5 to 6 years because obviously we're getting that gigantic transference of wealth. And it's so funny because many times I see market pundits talking about the fact that, the younger generation is not prepared for retirement. Well, guess what? Maybe the younger generation is going to get a windfall that helps them prepare for retirement, and maybe that's going to ease the burden. But again, having said that, we're seeing situations where people inherit money. And I think one of the biggest things that we do is to keep people from doing something stupid with the money that they then inherit.
But Chris, that's a great point that you bring up. Let's not even talk about the next 6 years, the next 60 years. I would say that younger generations are way more inquisitive. They have more education, more tool sets, more platforms. I think, parents my age, let's call it late Gen X, especially for women, we're more communicative about it. We have control of our money. It's more of an open conversation. So I think as we go through this transference of wealth and the generations are more free to talk about it and there's tools at their disposal, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I'm seeing a huge surge, especially amongst women, for education because many times traditionally the husband was the breadwinner, he paid the bills, and the woman wasn't really aware of what was going on. That's totally changed, and I would have to say in the last 20 years. I mean, women now are realizing they got to take control of their financial future, whether it's getting ready for retirement or inheriting money, from their parents. I really like what I see because, people aren't hiding anymore. They're coming out and having these conversations, which you have to have. I mean, that's the best thing that you can do in order to have everybody be successful financially.
Right, and there's a number of reasons behind it. More than half of, the percentages in college, more than half are women. Mm-hmm. They're in the workforce, whether they have the opportunity to, or how expensive the cost of living is now, especially in the cities like New York. You have to work. They're delaying having children for those reasons, if at all, and it's more of an open, intelligent conversation. So hopefully when this wealth transference happens with the Gen Xers to the next generation, it won't be such a burden, because it's not an easy conversation to have, but I feel like we're talking about it now, and the tools, the educational tools that are available just in the past 6 years, total game changer.
Well, and the other thing that's happening, which I really like to see, like in our practice, we don't charge for accounts under $10,000. So we're getting a lot of parents, they've inherited money from their mom and dad. They're in their 40s, 50s, mid-50s. They're setting up accounts for their kids. They're getting their kids involved in investments at an early age, sometimes 14, 15 years old. So to me, that provides a lot of hope for the future because, if you're 21 years old and you have an investment account, well, you're going to be looking at this like, I'm not spending everything I'm making. I need to save some money. Okay, now I'm in the workforce. Oh, now I need to do a 401k. So I see a lot of not glass half empty, but I see a lot of glass half full. And, for a senior advisor like myself, I think it's a really good trend.
Well, here's to the next 6 years. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate the insight. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.